everybody, Planet Walls here. I'm going to give a quick introduction of this deck. I'm talking quietly because my wife has gone to bed actually, and she's in the next room, but hopefully I can position myself close enough to the mic to alleviate that concern, to mitigate it as you will, as it were. Yeah, I don't want to mix those up. If you will, as it were. Yeah, those are basically the same thing. So, at least they are to me. This is what Chris and I have deemed a jacking of the fittest or mid-range survival jacking. This is really a violent card compared to like the promo art, which I won't look up here, but man, brutal, right? So in the following series of videos, I recorded a deck tech earlier, and then the file didn't save, or I lost it, or something. I don't know. Maybe it's corrupted. I was confused, but because I've been trying to experiment with Cam Studio to eliminate the toolbar from the bottom of my screen, some things have been screwing up. So unfortunately, I do have to keep the toolbar in for now until I figure out how to make that go away. Though I do appreciate the comment that said that it's distracting. But anyway, back to the deck. So one of the things that Chris and I have got our sights on in Classic, this is Chris Cool, is that we want to win what's called the DuPont Challenge, I think. It's a bounty. If someone can 4-0 a DE with a deck that has a squee and at least 3 survivals of the fittest, they get 100 tickets from DuPont. And of course, if we get the 100 tickets, we're going to do something obnoxious with it. Either sponsor our own bounty for something ridiculous, like playing a classic deck with more than 20 lands, or maybe donate it to the community or donate part of it, or try to foil out our Orcish Lumberjacks or something. Anyway, so I won't spoil the results of this tournament, but the goal is to 4-0. Of course, moneying with a deck like this in Classic, the most powerful online format, the online equivalent of Vintage, as it were, would just be a reward in itself. Even playing it is shocking that this deck would be playable. So, DuPont Challenge explained. I will talk about some of the card choices and then some of the more subtle elements of the deck. And once I do that, then we will close out the video. So assume this is the part where I start talking about the cards. Thank you for listening thus far. I'll talk about the mana base first, because one of the important things is the number of forests and red sources. So because the deck is based around Orcish Lumberjack, and you can find a similar deck tech video actually for my Classic League deck, which is close to this, but certainly not the same. I actually like this one much better. It has Fauna Shamans. This has Survivals. The Fauna Shamans are easier to land and they attack because Cavern of Souls is good, but Survival can do a whole lot of shit that Fauna Shaman can't. So anyway, mana base, we got 9 fetches, all of which can find a forest. 1 Trop Island, 1 Volk Island for the very few blue cards that are in the deck. As many basic forests as possible, in this case 4, though I also played a Gaia's Cradle, which is quite good, especially if you rip it late game. There's a Mana Crypt, and then 2 Cavern of Souls to help power out some things, and they're also versatile in terms of colors. We also have a Soul Ring, and then 9 Mana Guys, 2 Birds, 3 Hierarchs, 4 Orcish Lumberjacks. Did I say 9 Mana Guys? Is that right? Yeah. The mix is because birds are important insofar as they can tap to add blue, or every once in a while you need them for other mana. You wouldn't think so, at least that's a rarity, but they're important. They can also add red, right? Noble Hierarch can't do that, but Noble Hierarch pumps your guys. It can attack on its own sometimes for a little. Lumberjack adds a ton of mana. So here's something that can happen in this deck, and I'll talk about this right now. You toss an Anger in the graveyard, and Anger gives your guys haste if you have a mountain. You can pitch a Lumberjack, or I'm sorry, you can play a Lumberjack, sack a forest to add 3 green, pitch another creature to Survival, and then play another Lumberjack, because you found it in your deck, basically, with Survival, and then play it, tap it, sack another forest to make another mana. So it adds, basically, you give up a land and a creature card from your hand to add mana. This isn't something you should do normally, only if you really need to power out a creature in that turn. But it's kind of unfair because something like Colonian Hydra, or Colonian Hydra plus Phantasmal Image with an Anger in the graveyard, you can just sort of win in one attack step. So there's sort of a like deck combo where you give up everything you've got in one turn to keep powering shit out with your Survival if they've got haste, right? Because you can use the mana ability on Orcish Lumberjack if it's got haste. So That's what's going on here. Survival of the fittest. This is, banned in Legacy, so it's, this is classic. Is one of the few places you can play it. Uh, there's a Gilded Drake, which is good against Oath. It can take dudes. It's pretty versatile. It's hard to interact with, and it's a 3/3 flyer, which means it blocks Trigon Predator, but Storm Breath can go over it. Hammer Mage is an anti-affinity card that also has applications against other decks, especially stacks. If you can power out this card through spheres, through Orcish Lumberjack, you can basically control the board. Phyrexian Revoker does cope with it, though, which is why there are alternative anti-artifact cards we'll talk about in a minute. So Anger plus Hammer Mage gives you a way to surprise, ruin their board, like Shatterstorm it, with a survival out. So that's why he's there. Phantasmal Image is versatile. It's good against Oath. If you have Anger in the graveyard, you can copy their Emrakul after it's come into play and just smash their face and kill them, usually, because your guy will come flying out of the gates. Scavenging Ooze are good against Dredge. They're also good in the creature-based matchups. Orcish Lumberjack can tap to add 3 green, and then you exile 3 green cards. Also good with Gaia's Cradle. This guy is basically an all-around cool dude. Keep in mind, every creature card, you can, if it's bad in a matchup, you can pitch it to survival, find a better creature. 4 Magus of the Moon are intense disruption in a lot of matchups. They demand being lightning bolted or swords or something. And we're playing enough basic forests and alternative mana sources that we can normally override the effect of the Magus on our own, though that is a concern. Basically, this creature can single-handedly win games against decks. It's also very good against stacks and affinity, especially if they don't hit their mana artifact draws. And it's also very good against Dredge because it turns off their Bazaar. Seeds of Innocence, these are 2 cards that Chris and I decided needed to be added to the main deck in order to have a good chance against affinity in the main. If you can power one of these out through a Lumberjack over their Lodestone Golems or whatever, it sets them back to square one most of the time. An opponent can play around it, but in a DE, they don't know what your deck list looks like. They might be scared, but they probably dump their hand. Caustic Wasps is an anti-stacks card, primarily. You can power it out on turn 1. If you have an Anger in the graveyard, having Caustic Wasps with haste is pretty good. It's essentially Trigon for artifacts, but it's only a 1/1, but it only costs green. So if you don't have access to blue, but you need Caustic Wasps down, that'll work when you couldn't otherwise use a Trigon Predator. Elvish Spirit Guide is here to pick up a dude from your deck that can add mana the next turn in case you need to push something out. You wouldn't think that would be useful very often, but it actually, I'm very glad we have this. I would consider putting another one in the deck. Squee is something that gives you advantage in the late game with survival, because every turn he comes back to your hand, and then you can keep finding more and more dudes. On the board, it's pretty weak, right? Because it's just a 1/1, but it can infi block sometimes. Trigon Predator smashes in the air. It's got a decent body, even though it can be bolted, but it's good with a Noble Hierarch swinging in there. It is effective against Oath, and it can occasionally have haste if your Anger is in the graveyard, and it is also good in the artifact matchups in the same way Caustic Wasps is, but it costs blue, a little harder to cast. So now let's go to the top of our curve here. These are the guys you can power out on turn 2, right, at the earliest. Storm Breath, this guy's in there for fish matchups that have either Lightning Bolts or Path to Exile / Swords as their removal, because they have a lot of trouble killing them, and you can just win with this. Molder Slug is in there for stacks, but it's also a decent body in other matchups. It also makes winning with Vault Key very difficult, and it makes the Tinker Plan suck, because they have to sack their artifacts every upkeep, even if they're taking like infinite turns or whatever. Kazul, this guy seems ridiculous, but he's ridiculous in a bad way. But he's a 5/4, which is a decent body in the format, and he makes it very hard for Affinity to attack with all their little shitters and kill you because you make 3/3 red ogre tokens. It's kind of like a propaganda in that way. Sorry, I had the gurgles. It's also good against Dredge because they have a lot of trouble making mana, and all their guys tend to be small and on the ground. So it basically prevents Dredge from winning all by itself, at least in game 1. They have to like attack you with Narc Amoebas, but that usually gives you enough time. Colonian Hydra, we'll talk about him in a minute. Caldera Hellion is a wrath effect that most of the time leaves a body on the field. It's a pretty powerful card to tutor for. It's completely useless in some matchups, but in others it's pretty good. Colonian Hydra, okay, so this has Trample, it's a 5-drop, and it's basically a 4/4. It comes into play with 4 counters, and every time it attacks, you double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, not just itself. That means 2 things, or it means several things. If this is by itself, or hasted out, it takes 2 attacks to kill your opponent, because it turns into an 8/8 with the first attack, and then the next one turns into a 16/16. Okay, that's the first thing. If it hastes, that means bam, bam, dead. If you have Scavenging Ooze with +1/+1 counters and this attacks, it will double the counters on the Scavenging Ooze to make it bigger. That's also something important. And finally, if you play this and you have enough mana for a Phantasmal Image, which happens quite frequently on a big turn with Lumberjacks, you can drop this guy and then copy him, and when they attack, they copy each other's counters, making them so you double both counters twice. In other words, this makes it into an 8/8, and then each is 16/16. You're attacking for 32. So if you have a lot of mana late game and you can survival a couple of times, and you have an Anger in the graveyard, you can just win right on the bat. It's also just a big guy to play in matchups like fish deck matchups, and landing it against Affinity gives you a clock that they have to race. So sideboard, I'll be real quick now because I know it's been a while. 2 more Seeds of Innocence to shore up the artifact matchups, just because it's the cheapest Shatterstorm you can play, even though it gives them a lot of life. Thunderscape Battle Mage is a card that can kill an enchantment on the spot. So this is good against combo decks that are running like Energy Field, Rest in Peace, or Leyline, Mask of whatever, Mask of Obedience, or the Thought Lash style decks. It's also good against Oath because it can kill an Oath. It's a human wizard, which means Cavern can name human, and you can cast the kicker costs for the colored mana, so you can also make them discard every once in a while, which is kind of cool. That's a rare play, though. Scavenging Ooze to shore up the Dredge matchup, and is also good against fish matchups. This is just a good creature all around. Sometimes you want 3. Grafdigger's Cage for Oath and for Dredge. These 3 blasts for any of the matchups against blue cards. Essentially, it kills enchantments, it kills Jaces, it counters counterspells. In Oath, it can protect some of your creatures by countering their counterspells. It's just good all around. Mistcutter Hydra is good against control decks. It's hasty, it's huge. You can play it sometimes very early in the game, especially with Mana Crypt and Soul Ring, for absolutely huge power toughness, and just smash their face. It murders Jace. You don't need Anger for it to haste, so it gives you an alternative option if they've removed your graveyard or otherwise neutered it. The only other relevant thing about it is that compared to Thrun, it automatically has haste, and we think the protection from blue plus haste might just be better than Thrun's non-counter and regenerate in a 4/4. It's hard to say though. Like Thrun is just a big wall against like fish style decks or like bug control decks or whatever. So it's hard to say, but I think this is better. It's just a better card to be able to survival out. Finally, Zealous Conscript shores up the Oath match because you can take one of their giant Oath guys. It also has some flexibility where you can take other permanents as well. So it doubles as sort of like a weird removal spell sometimes. Ingot Chewer shores up the artifact matchups and also gives you some spot removal for artifacts, which the deck is in some ways lacking in the main. Because all your artifact removal is Molder Slug, Caustic Wasps, Trigon, and in Hammer Mage, it's all very conditional. I didn't talk about the Lavamancer. I should talk about him. He's good against fish style decks, hate bears. He can win the game almost by himself. He does some extra damage. He's good. He can kill your own guys, which against a Dredge is sometimes useful to remove their whatever's their bridge from blows. He can also kill your own Magus, which sometimes you need to be able to do something obscene in a turn. Then finally, a second Caldera Hellion to give you a Wrath effect. So let's see. I talked about the DuPont Challenge. I talked about every card in the deck. I talked about ramping up with your Orcish Lumberjacks. Essentially, this is a very difficult deck to play. You have tons of options. Not only do you have to think about attacks and blocks, but it's very easy to make a mistake like sacrificing your Taiga to Orcish Lumberjack and then no longer having a guy have haste because this requires a mountain. Sometimes you're operating with very few lands on the board. there's just a lot going on essentially, and it can be hard to balance it all in your head and remember what you're doing, go for your goals, and close out the game. I would recommend playing with this deck to people in the Classic community who have access to these cards. It seems powerful to me. This build is close to being right, I think. Not quite precise. Um, just try it out. It's really hard, but it's really rewarding, and you would be shocked how powerful this little guy is. I mean, this guy turns every one of your lands into a Black Lotus, and they can tap too. So, like, I mean, not every one of your lands are forests, right? That's good. I don't know. Maybe we want to play a deck with a Wildfire or something. I don't know. That sounds fun too. So give this a shot. I really think you'll like it, whoever you are. And thank you so much for watching Playing the Unplayable. I hope you enjoy the matches that follow. Um, I would highly encourage you to watch all of them. There's a lot of exciting stuff that happens, and I'll say that without giving away any spoilers. But some cool shit happens all the time. Like everything except for the first match, basically. I should say one more thing. For the first two matches, I have some friends over behind who are talking, so there's less obvious strategic discussion and more sort of humorous people talking about funny stuff in the background. I know that's not to everybody's taste, um, but there are still some cool things that happen in those games, and if you aren't enjoying those, I would really encourage you to watch the third and fourth rounds when I am just flying solo. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the videos.